I think that's good. Okay.
I'm Caroline, I'm from OH2 and I head up the OH Eco team, and I'm joined by Ruth and Ali Led. So really, we're here, aren't we, because creation's currently facing a climate emergency. I think that's what's brought us together for this conversation. So just in a nutshell, really, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we've burnt a lot of fossil fuels. Globally, we're currently burning fossil fuels 1 million times faster than they were made. So in doing so, we've put a lot of extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's resulted in the average global temperature being approximately 1.1 degrees centigrade hotter than it was back in 1850. And that sounds tiny, but it's already having a big impact. So we're seeing increased incidences of flooding, even in Loughborough. There are people in Open Heaven who've been flooded out of their homes, so it's impacting close to home. But also we're seeing increased wildfires around the world, rising temperatures. So just in the last few days before we're having this conversation, temperatures have shot up in India, much higher than expected, and that's making it hard for people to live there. There are parts of the world where people are struggling to grow food and to feed themselves because of changes in the climate. And other species really are being affected as well. So since the 70s, 60% of the world's vertebrate animals have been wiped out. And we're just being warned by scientists, I think, that we've only got a few years to act on this. So it's really, concerning, and the emergency, I think, really is the right word. And we've known for several decades that we're mistreating creation and what the solutions are, but we're just not implementing them as fast as we need to. And I think it really is a justice issue too, as well, for me. So in 2020, Oxfam released some data that showed that the richest 1% of the world's population are responsible for more than twice as much carbon pollution as the poorest half of humanity. So in the UK, the poorest households have an average carbon footprint of 5 tonnes, and the richest households have an average footprint of around 16 tonnes, so 3 times as much. So that's kind of the problem we're facing. So I guess I'm keen to hear how you first came to this issue, what sparked your concern for environmental justice, and what's it got to do with your faith?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to me for education as well, finding out about all of this, and it is all out there. And I think just the realization that I can't sit back and do nothing about it. I don't feel like I am in a position to be able to do that, knowing what is happening to people, what is happening to the world. And recognizing that individually, although it might be a small drop in the ocean, I can make a difference, whether that is with my own carbon footprint or whether that is perhaps influencing others and helping to educate others in the same way that I've kind of been educated around it, really. I know you're going to come on to speak about some biblical stuff as well, and where it kind of fits in the Bible. And I think, it's on the first few pages where we're called to care for our creation, and that comes into it as a huge part as well. Definitely. And as I say, I can't sit back and not do anything about it, really. So it's that need and sort of feeling to being called to being involved in it and getting stuck in.
Yeah, and I think similarly for me, actually, having learnt a little bit more about our impacts and some of the small things we do that can make big impacts to the world, to this climate that we have, probably watching a fair amount of Blue Planet and Green Planet, all those kind of documentaries, which actually have a basis in fact. I think there's too much fact to ignore. So at that point, if I am ignoring it, it's because I'm feigning ignorance, and I don't think that is a good enough reason to not act. And if my actions and my choices can impact my environmental status, can impact how I'm affecting this climate, I need to make wise choices and wise actions, because God called me to this planet and called me to subdue it and to protect it, and to coexist with him in creation. So I feel like I should be doing that in a good way, not in a destructive way. And really importantly for me, I think the climate emergency is just as much a people emergency as it is nature and the temperature, because some of the really poor people in this world who aren't having as bigger impact with their carbon footprint, as you just said, are the ones who are suffering most. And I think that it's my selfish desires that are leading me to make like choices which are more detrimental to the climate. It's not a need, it is mostly selfish desires. Therefore, I have to make choices that are wise. I have to make choices that are more set in justice for the people who can't make those decisions and those choices themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ruth. It's very much a people crisis as much as a nature crisis, and I think that's how I first came to kind of this issue. So I think when I first started becoming concerned about this, it was that I was thinking initially about global poverty and global justice for the poorest. But the more I delved into that, the more I realised that the climate emergency plays a big role in global poverty and global justice. So that felt to me like the most important issue, really, because we need a livable planet. There's no point tackling other kind of issues of justice and poverty if we've not got a planet we can all live on. But I also think as time has passed and as I've worked on this issue more and more, I've also felt that creation in and of itself is worth fighting for, kind of nature and other species, just because God places so much intrinsic value on it. And maybe I didn't see that when I first had faith, but I can really see that in the Bible now, that it's just as much about justice for other species as it is about justice for humans. I think one verse in particular that struck me a lot is, and it's the verse probably most of us know, is that like John 3:16. So for God so loved the world. I think when I was a kid in church, what I heard was God so loved the people, and it wasn't until I was a student maybe that I realised that it was talking about world. So I think that word in Greek is cosmos. I'm not a theologian, but it's talking about the whole creation, not just the people. So God cares for the whole cosmos, and he's working to redeem the whole cosmos. And I think we see that in Romans as well, where it talks about the whole of creation is groaning and waiting for a new heaven and a new earth. But we need to kind of bring about as much of that as we can now alongside God, not just wait for it to come later. And there's loads of stuff throughout the Bible, but I guess they're the main passages that jump out at me. I don't know if you guys have got any.
Yeah, I've got a couple. Again, it's looking at the origins of words. I was lucky enough to speak at the OH Weekend Away around kind of climate and environmental justice as well. And there's a couple of words in Genesis that kind of stood out to me, and one of those being the term kind of subduing the earth. That is, God gives us that role and asks us to do that, and that word being kabash. And it's about taming wildness, bringing harmony out of disharmony, which was originally there, and that is the role that God gave us. He's calling us, as you said already, to kind of steward that, and then asking us to rule over that. And that word being radha, which might be pronouncing wrongly. And there's a lovely phrase which I found around this, which was actively partnering with God in taking the world somewhere. And that, for me, just kind of encompasses it all. And that's what we are called to do. We're called to rule over his creation. How are we going to do that? What's our choice within that? Are we going to be good rulers and look after the resources that we have? Or are we just going to, burn our way through everything, use it for our own gain and not steward it well, and not take the world somewhere? And we know that there's, another world to come. But as you say, Caroline, I think we really have to look after the world that we do have as well. We are very much called to do that. And I don't think we can just give up on it. I don't think that's what we are called to do.
Yeah.
Like I kind of said, to do with people and what I think is the justice side of this, we are, as so eloquently put in the economic justice series that we've seen in church, of the kind of the four vulnerable people, of the foreigner, the orphan, the poor, and the immigrant. If we are ignoring those people, that's not very godlike. That's not what the Bible is calling us to do. And I think you have to acknowledge the impact that it is having on them. And by making choices that are fit for purpose in this world, fit for justice for those people, that's actually justice for the environment as well, that God is calling us to be co-creators with. And God called it good. He everything he made, and he made us last. He made all the animals and he made them good. He made the fish in the sea good. He made the birds of the air good, and he made all the plants good. And then we are very good. So we are part of that goodness that God made. And I think we need to acknowledge the goodness that God made in that and not just think that we are better than it.
Yeah.
All the good came before us, and it was like we need to plough that on and keep it good. Because I think it is a selfish thing to think this planet's over, because this planet involves people, and people are important, and the world is important.
Yeah, we can talk about kind of, this is what you practically need to do. You need to drive your car less, or you need to eat less meat, or whatever it is we're asking people to do. But people don't always respond to that. I think, what's the real root of this?
It's a huge issue, isn't it? Otherwise it probably would have been solved by now.
Yeah.
So it is. It's so interconnected with so many different things, and it's a very, very complicated issue. I think when it comes down to those just, little steps and facts and things like that, yes, of course, we can do those things, and we're going to talk about them a little bit later as well. But I think it really has to become kind of a heart issue for people to actually want to change, until you either maybe see that impact yourself, or see somebody, really close to you, some people you love impacted by that. I think that's when it really changed for me as well, when you really feel that and you recognise that. And I think until we hit that point, and more people feel that way, I think it's going to be hard to kind of drive that change.
Yeah, I agree. It's very set in culture, or it's very easy to go along with the culture of capitalism, of consumerism, of just buying what you want when you want, irrelevant of the cost somewhere else. So we have a saying that's we use quite a lot of, like, everything costs the same, it's just who's paying. Is it the farmer who's paying? Are you paying the price in the shop? Is it the shop owner who might be not getting as much, or is it the earth that is paying and taking up, absorbing the impact of that top that costs £2, where no one's getting paid fair prices for it? It's being shipped really far. The farmers are getting paid very little for it, and the person who made it's getting paid near enough nothing. That's not honouring to any of them, and it's leading to climate change. But that is something that we don't think about, because we just see it in a shop, or we see a price tag that is convenient for us or cheap for us. And it's that culture of, but that's fine. It's not questioning where it's come from, because it's quite deep set, and it takes some conscious thought to reset that culture of, but why am I buying this, or why am I making these choices instead? And I think it does come down to consumerism and greed, because I think a lot of the problems with energy, where we see energy companies making vast profits at the moment, when profiting off a lot of people's poverty and despair, and the world is suffering for this energy crisis, and that is largely led by people not wanting to sacrifice profits and looking at green solutions, because they take time and they'll take money, whereas at the moment they have an income source that is providing profits. And maybe that's quite a cynical look on it, but I think greed is a real root in a lot of environmental damage.
I agree. I think, for all of us. So certainly the fact that 1% of the population globally are causing, more emissions than half the population, that's about greed, isn't it? But then I also think when we're kind of tackling those big companies or those very rich people, we need to have a bit of grace, because we've all got that, haven't we? We're all kind of greedy and that drive that we want more and more stuff, and that causes emissions. And I think as well, I sometimes think it's about, it's where we're trying to find our identity or our meaning, isn't it? We're sometimes trying to find our meaning in the stuff we have, or the things that we do, that, traveling long distances or whatever. And whereas really we need to look for our contentment and our identity in Jesus. Because obviously there are loads of people in the world who are concerned about climate change, but I think as people of faith, as Christians, we're quite uniquely placed to talk about contentment, because we are trying to find our identity in Jesus Christ rather than in the stuff we own. The Israelites are told to only take what they need of the harvest, and to not go back and kind of glean what's left over, and to leave it for the poorest people. It talks about the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows, and that God will then bless us. So that's like a principle there, isn't it? To have joy in enough, and to say, well, we've got enough, we don't need We don't need more, and we've got contentment in our faith.
I was just reflecting on that as well, and I think you can see it through history, can't you? You know, if we look at all the statistics and things, a lot of that comes from the change comes from the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
When we started to produce more and consume more, and actually even now, or going back periods of several hundred years, I think different cultures, even within our own country, our own society, we're probably a lot more in harmony with nature and in tune, and there probably are still some different cultures around the world, or different countries in the world, different places which we might look on as maybe less advanced, but actually they maybe have a better relationship with nature perhaps than we do, because they don't have that greed, they don't have that desire to have everything, and they have a much deeper rooted understanding of the resources which they live around, and how they use those, and using those sustainably. And I think we have been better, haven't we, at different points in history at living in harmony with the earth. I imagine more in the way that God intended, rather than, you know, the last couple of hundred years where we really have just accelerated our extraction of natural resources and completely overused them. So I think there's something in that as well, which is just interesting to reflect on.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying about having grace for people, and this is a conversation that you need to meet people where they're at, because they might not actually have any understanding to begin with, and it's about trying to work out a way that works for everyone. You can't just stop fossil fuels straight away. That's not a solution that is going to work. We need to act like engineers, not politicians, and try and work for the solution, not just why it's going wrong. And I think that collaboration is really difficult. But having that grace for each other, it's not about shaming or shaming people, but kind of allowing them to see their actions and how their actions impact the world.
I guess, what are some of the ways you guys are responding?
We try, and we try and do a lot of different things in life. Sometimes we get it wrong, and I think that's, again, having grace for yourself. You will get it wrong, but a lot of it comes down to, within lifestyle stuff, making conscious decisions about food we're eating, where we're buying things from. So whether that's fresh produce or clothes, making a commitment to not buying clothes you don't need. There's a really great rule of 30. So if you're not going to wear something 30 times, you don't need it. Which is a really simple but practical thing, because some people will just buy a dress for a single occasion. And if that's what you want, maybe rethink how you go about doing that. There are ways of renting dresses or going to charity shops, stuff like that. Because so much of the world's fashion is just worn once and thrown away, which was a statistic. I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but it was a statistic that really scared me. Maybe I'm just not fashionable enough, but I think I'm okay with that. So yeah, fashion choices, thinking about our energy at home. So actively trying to choose like a green energy provider, which sounds like an obvious thing, but actually sometimes it's a sacrifice, because you have to acknowledge it might be a bit more expensive, but the reason you're doing it is bigger. There's loads of little things, trying to shop from low plastic like shops. So there's some shops in Loughborough that you can take your own containers to. So Elf Foods and the cleaning cabinet, you can take your own containers to, fill them up, weigh them, and then just pay for what you've got, which is also a good way of reducing waste. And
Elf Foods will do it for you while you wait, or
well.
go off and do something else. They're great.
And when you said you're thinking about what food you're eating, what does that mean?
So we made conscious decisions to be vegetarian. We don't eat meat. That isn't trying to shame people who eat meat. We just think, well, especially me, I think that I actually think eating meat can be quite biblical, but the way that we eat meat in this culture is quite detrimental to our environment. We mass produce it, we grow loads of crops to feed to these animals, we mulch up the ocean floor to feed to animals, to increase yield of beef crops or pork crops, and that doesn't seem right to me. Our cattle farming produces a lot of greenhouse gases, and I think that we need to reduce our meat intake as a nation. It's nutritionally, we eat much more meat than we need. So that's something that we've chosen to do. But we also then try and buy things from Britain, so they've not flown. Try and buy things without plastic, because plastic isn't a renewable source. It is, we try and recycle it, but a lot of plastic recycling just gets shipped abroad as part of our recycling efforts. And yeah, especially buying British vegetables. I think this is something that we've learned of. Sometimes it means you can't cook what you might want to cook, but that sacrifice is for a reason, and makes you end up being a bit more creative, which is always a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a big thing for me as well is just education around these issues. It's not like we've made all these changes at once necessarily. I think, when we did get married, we sort of drew a bit of a line in the sand of we wanted to try and have this as part of our identity and try and look to do some of these things and live out what we are talking about. But actually just learning more about it, whether that's listening to podcasts, reading books, speaking to other people, and just trying to make little small changes one at a time, because you can't do everything at once. You'll always be imperfect. I've tried to reduce my commuting in the car. I try to cycle a couple of days a week now, but it's not always easy. Sometimes it seems a bit far and I'm a bit too tired, or the weather's not good and that's enough to put me off. Again, it comes back to that grace, doesn't it? And having grace for yourself sometimes, as well as others, when maybe you feel like you feel a little bit short on what you're trying to do, I suppose, around that.
So I think for me, similar to yourself, done a lot of things in terms of lifestyle changes. So me and my husband choose not to own a car. We both have bicycles. We walk a lot, use trains. We sometimes hire or borrow cars. I'd love to see a car share club in Loughborough, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay. Although I do know lots of Open Heaveners have their own kind of informal car clubs between different households. So and we've benefited from that at times. So we try to be really energy efficient at home. So we've got reasonably low energy use, and we had solar panels in our last house. So one kind of little thing that cost us no money but had quite a big impact, while we were living in an OH community house for a few years, as a household, we put a chart on our fridge, and then every Sunday took a meter reading and just wrote that on the fridge. Every time someone opened the fridge door, they saw how much energy we were using. It was just like a little reminder in the background. And that was all we did. And our energy use dropped by a quarter. Like our gas went down by a quarter and our electricity by just slightly less than a quarter. So often just being aware of what you use, I think, means you use less. So it isn't always about spending a load of money on solar panels.
Yeah, so I guess something else around kind of lifestyle, which we haven't really touched on yet, which I've got a few facts for, is around our kind of banking and pensions as well, actually. And there are often a couple of things which we don't maybe think about as much, because we don't really see necessarily the impact of ourselves, and a lot of people might not even be aware necessarily of those sorts of things. I guess banking probably is one that people are perhaps more aware of, but there are definitely a lot of greener banks out there, and some which aren't so good. One of the stats that I pulled up on this was that 35 of the world's major banks have provided £2 trillion to fossil fuel companies since the very famous Paris Agreement in 2015, and that was in the 5 years following that, which is just a colossal amount of money, isn't it? And although it might not directly be our money, it is where some of that is being invested by these very large banks. So I definitely recommend checking out how green your bank is, and just considering, it's really easy to change banks. Where you might be able to put that money, and where it might be able to be invested in something that's a little bit better. And then so many of us will have pension schemes as well, and a lot of those are just automatically we're enrolled into now. And this stat I couldn't believe really, but half of the money in the global financial system is invested in wealth pensions, which is £34 trillion roughly. And most are at least partially invested in fossil fuels in some sort of way. So it is unfortunately an industry which traditionally has given very good returns, which is why these companies have invested in it. But it's perhaps not the best thing for our world, and it comes back to where's the cost. So less than 1% of assets of the world's largest 100 pension funds are invested in low carbon solutions. So I think it's something that we can definitely do better. And again, it's one of those things where you might think, well, what can my individual impact be? But if we were all to collectively to take action around that, to change bank providers, to get in contact, and you can request that your pension fund is, they invest into greener companies and put pressure on your employers to do that. And if enough people do that, then there can be systemic change. And I think that's a big lifestyle choice which people can look at as well.
Yeah. It's quite, on one level, it's quite easy, isn't it, compared to some of the lifestyle changes we try to make, and it often has a bigger impact than any of the lifestyle changes we make. For a long time, my campaigning looked like writing letters. So I remember writing a lot of letters to my MP, to like big oil companies and that kind of thing. I remember visiting Andy Reid and then Nicky Morgan in Parliament, and I've met with Jane Hunt a lot in the last year in Loughborough. But I think, and that is all good stuff. I think we should definitely do it, and it does have impact. But I think back in around 2013, I started feeling a bit frustrated, really, at the lack of progress that's being made, and feeling like you're being fobbed off a bit by your kind of leaders. And I'm sure you felt that frustration too. So at the time, I was doing an Open Heaven kind of year-long program and had been thinking a lot about what was God calling me to. And I responded to an email that I got from someone in a little Christian charity called Green Christian, inviting Christians to join them at a direct action camp against a fracking project in Sussex. So fracking is like a way of extracting gas that's really like harmful. So I went along, and I knew it was a direct action camp, so that was kind of like protesting and potentially like deliberately breaking the laws. Is what's called civil disobedience. And the thing I remember about it, looking back, is that I would normally book like those train tickets where you have to stick to your train, but I was frightened that I wasn't gonna like it. It was gonna be scary. So I booked a flexible ticket and said to Richard, like, I might be home in 3 days, or I might be home tomorrow morning, depending on how it goes. and off I went. But yeah, that's where I met a group of Christians there, and I watched some of them get arrested alongside Caroline Lucas, the MP, and did a bit of kind of observing what was happening to kind of help them with that process. And with some of those Christians, later founded something called Christian Climate Action. So we're like a movement of Christians from lots of different denominations and church backgrounds who like support each other in doing that kind of direct action. So since then I've been involved in various different like protests, like Extinction Rebellion protests, blocking roads, that kind of thing. Just over about a year ago, it was a year ago now, I kind of blocked a road on my own in Loughborough, so that's the one time I've been arrested. So, and we've also done actions kind of aimed at encouraging different sections of the church to divest and to aim for net zero. So we did an action outside of the Church of England Synod that resulted in them aiming for net zero by 2030. Yeah, that was quite a different tack to take from what I've been doing before. But it's definitely had impact. So we were kind of formed in about 2013, but in 2019 joined up with Extinction Rebellion to an extent. And since then, I feel like that's changed the national conversation. So the term climate emergency that we're all saying in this conversation wouldn't have been about before that, and it's now in the Oxford Dictionary. It was the word of the year, I think, in 2019 or 2020. And just through my paid work, which is all about climate change, suddenly found that the local authorities I was working with were suddenly much more interested in the issue, and suddenly had funds to address it, whereas before there was no money to do that. It just was suddenly magically there. And nowadays I run like training courses for different organisations around what's called carbon literacy. So it's thinking about the climate emergency, and suddenly just loads more interest from every different sector. And I think that's come about because of those protests. Not that, our leaders would always want to say that, but I think that's definitely changed things. And I guess it's interesting when you're engaging in MVDA and civil disobedience, it feels like you got to be like a good person as a Christian, don't you? So you're like, but we do feel like we're inspired by Jesus. He turned over the tables in the temple when he saw that injustice. Just little examples in the Bible, like the midwives in Egypt who kind of lied to the Egyptians about, to save babies, and And people like Martin Luther King, who just said, well, I've tried everything out. That was my feeling. I've tried everything else. What is left? And that's what Martin Luther King said during the civil rights movement. It's like he'd written letters, he'd spoken to leaders, and he was like, we've just got to fill the jails now. That was his expression. Yeah. So and I think all these different ways of acting are valid. We need to be like avoiding plastic and cycling and eating less meat, and I think you're doing a better job of eating less meat than I am. Yeah, but we also need to, I think part of my motivation in that as well was I was fed up of the emphasis being on like everyone's got to do their own little bit, and I'm like, what about the big companies who are having a much bigger impact, or the richest 1%, or the leaders who've got much more ability to have an impact, to have a bigger impact. Not that we should stop doing the things we're doing, but we need to get to the people who can have the
policy
really big impact.
needs to change for things to change.
To make it easier for us to ride our bikes or do whatever.
I think one of the frustrating things is a lot of possible solutions are out there, and the conversations are being had and promises are being made, but whether they're being kept, I think is often why some of this civil disobedience and actions are happening. Because a lot of people, perhaps like yourself, like us, don't believe that those promises are being met effectively. And this is why we have to then step out and do something about it, I suppose, which is a bit more blurred.
I think it's a bit of you holding the politicians to account. So I appreciate everything you do and the commitment that you give to it, and you inspire us to do more. Because systemic change is definitely what is needed, and that needs to happen from politicians and our governments, and governments uniting as well, not just individual governments. It needs to be a worldwide effort.
Yes, it does. So I think we've all at different times been involved in the Loughborough Climate Vigil, which is once a week, where it stood outside Jane Hunt, our MP's office, really like lobbying her and the government to take this seriously and treat it as an emergency. So how have you guys found that when you've been along?
Well, it was really interesting because I was sort of there as the first one that we did actually, and it felt very different to anything that I'd kind of done before, and I think we were taken a bit by surprise in the first week, weren't we? Because Jane hadn't actually showed up, and we weren't necessarily expecting her to be there. And she was quite receptive to a lot of conversations as well. So I think there was, I found a lot of value in it. Unfortunately, my work situation means I haven't been able to attend the large amount of them, to be honest. But it's good to feel like there is something that we can do locally, and it's attracted a wide variety of people, hasn't it? From different backgrounds, some from faith backgrounds, from different churches in Loughborough, and some without faith as well. But it's great to have a group of passionate people together around that.
I really love doing it again. My work situation, my work days changed, so I couldn't then continue on the Friday morning, but really hoping to get involved in some more of the Climate Vigil and CCA action. I found it really valuable for the unity that the people who turned up showed, that it was a bit uncomfortable. It was a little bit weird standing on the corner. Lots of people, some people for, some people against walking past, but it gave me a lot of conviction in my understanding of why I was doing it. It gave me a lot of comfort knowing that there were other people who cared about it, and it felt like I was doing something, where it can feel a bit helpless in this situation of, I'm doing these lifestyle things, but it made me feel like I was doing something towards acting on the systemic side of things, and joining that campaigning side of climate justice, or fighting the climate justice. I think it's a really valuable way to demonstrate to our MP, the person who has the most sway of our little area, Loughborough, as to how important this issue is.
And I think we've spoken to her, quite a lot of times now. She's not there every week, but we have spoken to her a lot, and it's resulted in her putting questions to Parliament, talking to Loughborough College about whether or not they can offer more courses and upskilling people to retrofit homes for energy efficiency. She's attended a 6-hour course that I ran with a local community group, so she's kind of had 6 hours of me talking about all of this stuff. So we've not convinced her yet. I don't know what else we can do. So it's definitely, we've built up a rapport with her, and we're still there every week. And like you say, there's people from probably about 5 different churches, plus people who aren't associated with the church there as well. So
I think it's been the longevity of it as well, hasn't it? And although sometimes it's not huge numbers, it is the fact that throughout the winter, we've made the decision consciously to keep doing it, even if it is just going to be 2 people stood there with signs. It's still, let's show up, let's be that presence, let's show that it is something that we really care about.
I think we peaked at 20 in the summer when it was nice, and we've gone down to 3 or 4, haven't we, when it's been really cold.
And then from doing that climate vigil with you, Caroline, we went up to Glasgow for COP26, and we all joined the CCA alongside Extinction Rebellion march. I think you did some extra stuff in Glasgow as well. Is there anything you want to?
I spent a bit of time. So there were obviously world leaders from all over the world meeting in a conference centre there, and there was a bit of a prayer vigil right outside literally facing the entrance. So we all sat against a wall that faced the entrance where they were going in and out, so they couldn't miss us. And one day it was just kind of silently praying there with signs to explain what we were doing. So that was like quite peaceful and felt quite purposeful, and just to be covering them in prayer as they were obviously negotiating
big decisions.
Big decisions about climate change. It felt like a kind of like small but important role to be doing that, and to be bringing prayer and God into that place. I got to kind of march, like you said, and took part in what's called a die-in action, where some of us just kind of lay on the ground with sheets over us in a train station while someone talked about different things, different ways in which people are dying around the world as a result of climate change. That was quite poignant, and it was just good to be there, I guess, when that was happening in our country, because those conferences happen every year but are often in far-flung places.
We made a distinct decision that we needed to go because it was important to us, and it was our chance to go without having a big environmental impact in the travel.
So
and it's been the last sort of 18 months for me, I suppose, where I felt like I want to do more than just these personal kind of lifestyle changes and bits and pieces that were spoken about as well, which is why I looked out there and became involved in CCA effectively. Caroline, and through you, I think, coming to speak here in OH1 probably pre-pandemic. I remember you coming to deliver a talk about that, and it's just the desire that actually I can't live with myself if I'm not doing something else. If and when I might have children, what are they going to ask? What did you do about this? And I want to be able to say that I tried to do something, whether that was successful or not. I didn't just sit back and kind of let it happen. So the other really nice thing for me with that is the platform that I have being a teacher. My head's quite receptive. I was actually able to deliver assembly about it. So the week after I gave an assembly to the whole school talking about it, and that platform to speak to 250 children and raise that awareness of climate change, which I think is on the agenda in a lot of schools. That it's really cool for them tangibly to see just a teacher, one of their teachers, go along to something like that and be able to share those experiences with them. Was fantastic as well. So I'm fortunate to have that platform, that being involved in those sorts of actions and being able to pass on those kinds of experiences and talk about them, I find really valuable as well.
We're talking quite positively here about, aren't we, all the things we're doing and the fact that we're acting with others, but it can feel really bleak and overwhelming, I think. So just very recently, I was in London for some Extinction Rebellion protests, and I was alongside lots of Christians, and that was great to know that there's lots of other people, but I did come away feeling a bit like, has that achieved anything? Or is it all just going, is it all just collapsing really around us? And when you look at the warnings from scientists and what's already happening in other parts of the world, it just feels quite depressing. So I think I'm mostly an optimist by nature, so I tend to work on the basis that we'll sort it. But I do have times when I just think, we're not, and we're going to have a bit of a societal collapse, or we're going to see a big reduction in the human population, or my child's future is going to be bleak when she's a grown-up. And I don't really have all the answers to that. I know, there are Christians out there thinking about eco-grief and anxiety and how churches can support people in that. I think mostly I often read Psalm 46, which talks about the fact that, mountains may fall and the seas, fall into the sea and things may collapse, but God kind of still holds us. And I guess there is that sense, isn't there, of big bad things have happened in the past throughout history, and God has remained God and has still got us. I think it's important that we acknowledge our grief and despair about this when we feel it, and sometimes kind of sit with it. And I think we had a week of the vigil where our focus was lament for 1 week, to just kind of lament what was happening, whereas most weeks we're kind of focused on solutions, aren't we, in our conversations with Jane?
It's difficult. It's like all of the big justice issues, isn't it, that we're looking at church as well. I think the same thing can be felt about all of the different issues. And it's really hard sometimes, and sometimes it does feel like we're going backwards and we're not going forwards. And I think it's important to recognise those feelings and not just hide them. And sometimes we have to have that time to grieve, don't we? And kind of rally around each other. I think sometimes with that, as you say, I think, prayer can be a big thing, can't it? I think it is for me, having that conversation with God and that dialogue with God. And I guess ultimately just trusting in his plans and purposes, and that he has a plan for us. It's not too late. That clock keeps ticking, doesn't it? And it keeps getting closer and closer. I think I still take solace in the fact that scientists say, people a lot cleverer than me, that there are still solutions out there, and that we still do have time. But it is fast running out, isn't it? And I think that's where that despair and that grief can creep in sometimes, particularly around, I think, this issue over some other issues of justice. It does feel like there is such a short time span left on it. And, 10, 15 more years, we are going to have crossed the point where even if we do manage to reverse things, there is going to be some irreparable damage. And I think that for me is why it maybe falls very close to the top of my agenda with different aspects of justice. Obviously, everything is important, but do you feel like there is a limited time on this until there is a catastrophic consequences?
So as Open Heaven Church, we've committed to go for something called Eco Church Award, which is a national award scheme available to churches of all denominations. So we've been looking over the last sort of 9 months at things like our teaching around environmental justice, how we manage our building in terms of being energy efficient, that kind of thing, how we manage the little bit of land we've got around the church building, how we kind of engage with our church community and the wider community on eco issues, and encouraging people in their own lives to think about all of this. So we should hopefully very soon achieve what's called Bronze Award. So that's really good, and that's our commitment as a church community at the moment. And for those of you who've been watching our conversation, I'd really encourage you to take some time to chat with God and to think about what your response to environmental justice should be. And it's kind of a dangerous question to ask God, really, because the response can change our lives quite a lot, but I think it is important.
Okay, so we're just going to finish with a prayer that we've used at some different CCA events before, and our climate vigil as well. It's titled A Franciscan Blessing. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen.
Amen.